Hello and welcome to another II Lunchtime Live. So today we will be discussing perhaps the hottest topic in personal finance, pensions and inheritance tax, specifically what plans to include pensions into inheritance tax from April 2027 means for your retirement, well, could mean for your retirement and estate plan. So I'm delighted to be joined here today by Cera Taylor, who's a chartered financial planner with Aberdeen, and our very own Craig Rickman, who's our personal finance editor. Both, thank you very much for joining me today. But we've got lots to discuss, but before we go into it, viewers, I'd like to encourage you to submit any questions you may have on our Slido event channel. I believe the details are in the description below. We've had many questions. I think it's over 50 questions. I think it really goes to show how big of an impact this could have on people's financial plans and estate planning. So, yeah, and also we have a poll, so please do interact with our poll. So, Cera, Craig, first thing I want to do is take you back to the 30th of October 2024 when the Chancellor made that announcement. I mean, it was I remember it very vividly. I was stress eating. I was eating sweets. I was eating cakes. I was eating crisps. Honestly, it's such a busy day for financial commentators such as myself. And I heard the announcement and thought, okay, this is a big deal. And the more I thought about it, more I realized this is a huge deal. This affects millions of savers, people who've diligently put money into their pensions with hope of actually passing on some of their assets to their loved ones, their beneficiaries, in a tax efficient manner as possible. But this almost flips the script. It's a game changer policy. What did you make of the announcement? Was this expected? Cera, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think there was a lot of speculation around whether tax-free cash would have been sort of abolished. That seemed to be the key message that was out there and the key sort of concern. So I was actually in the II office in Manchester on the day, so it was very busy that day. We were struggling to get seats, and yeah, there was a really good buzz about the place, and we were just sort of like trying to get snippets whilst working to hear what exactly is going on. So I think when tax-free cash hadn't been sort of targeted, if you like, for that change, there was a bit of relief there because we were thinking, well, you know, this has been the basis that people have been putting money into those pensions. So there's a bit of relief from that perspective. And I must admit, I don't think on the actual day itself I realised the wider implications that there was from pensions forming part of the estate, if that is to come to fruition. What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, we knew that tax hikes were coming at the autumn budget. Labour had identified the sort of multi-billion fiscal black hole, and pensions and inheritance tax were seen as soft targets, and the IHT exemption within pensions particularly so. So that wasn't a huge shock. I think where the surprise has come in has been afterwards. Now we've sort of had the chance to unpack what the government has proposed, what this could mean for estates, for families, for beneficiaries. I think that's the bit that's raised some eyebrows, and obviously we're going to get into that today.
Yeah, but there was talk of the government perhaps looking at the 25% tax-free cash you can take out of pensions. I think there was a lot of talk leading up to the announcement. Then we had this. So was that surprising that the government went for, you know, putting pensions within IHT calculations rather than, you know, the tax-free cash allowance?
Yeah, I think of all of the sort of speculation that I listened to and thought about myself, that possibly wasn't something that I even considered. I think tax-free cash potentially going was one of the areas which I've mentioned, but also perhaps like changing the annual allowance or reducing that down, amending tax relief on contributions, particularly for higher rate and additional rate earners. They're sort of the areas that I perhaps suspected may be impacted. So yeah, it was certainly surprising.
I think in some respects it should have been certainly a bit less of a surprise, particularly given Labour had abandoned plans to reinstate the lifetime allowance, the ceiling that your pensions could be worth before you start paying some pretty punishing tax charges. They wanted to bring that back, and when they abandoned plans shortly before the election to do that, then I guess, you know, removing the IHT exemption on pensions should have been less of a shock, because they've now sort of implemented a cap of sorts of what your pensions can be worth. Obviously they can still be worth whatever, but there could be some really painful tax charges to pay for whoever inherits them. So,
yeah,
yeah, I guess it's still a bit of a surprise, but in that respect, probably less of one.
Okay. So many people will be rightly concerned or just thinking, what does this change mean for my retirement and estate plan? So should we just, say what it is? So what are the changes? How could it impact people's retirement and estate planning?
So from April 2027, any unspent pensions will form part of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll pay inheritance tax, or whoever receives them will pay inheritance tax on them, so they'll be included as part of your estate. The existing lifetime tax-free allowances, the nil rate band, the residence nil rate band, those two allowances are still available. So if your total assets, including your pensions, is worth less than your tax-free allowances, there's no inheritance tax to pay. Plus the spousal and civil partner exemption remains in place as well. So anything you leave to a spouse or a civil partner, there's no inheritance tax. It would be when it moves down a generation, or if and this is one of the sort of sticking points around it, I guess. If you're not married, then anything you leave to a partner, there could be tax as well. And I mean that's one of the areas where things could get quite interesting.
Definitely. There's a few clients, if you don't mind me mentioning, that have perhaps been in long-term partnerships and haven't chosen to get married, but actually on the back of this had planned their estates really, really carefully. And on the back of this, now there is an inheritance tax liability despite that planning. So now potentially marriage could be an option to try and reduce that tax bill down. Which,
And when we say pensions, we're just talking about defined contribution pensions, not annuity, not defined benefit pensions.
Yes, so it's defined contribution pensions. Defined benefit pensions are not included. There is some confusion around what else might be included, whether annuities. That seems unlikely, but that's one of the problems at the moment. So the government has made this proposal about what it wants to do with inheritance tax and pensions due to coming in a couple of years' time, but there's still quite a bit to work through here. There's still things that we don't know, and there's still things that the government needs to clear up. So I mean, hopefully we'll get some information on that soon. There's been some opposition to the changes as well.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to see how that sort of plays out over the coming months.
Okay, so what we know is set to come into effect in April 2027, and we know it applies to defined contribution pension. Is there anything else that perhaps we know? Do we know how it might interplay with the nil rate band, other allowances?
Mm-hmm. So currently it looks like that's going to form part of using that nil rate band, and where it gets quite tricky is, as you've mentioned there, is where somebody's estate is worth over £2 million, you actually lose that main residence nil rate band completely. So if pensions then form part of that, there's some substantial tax charges that could come into play there. Now that's not known yet, but that's what it's looking like.
Yeah. And Craig, what's the rationale behind these plans? Why now? Did the government choose the 30th of October 2024 to announce these plans?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are probably a couple of reasons. I think the first goes back to what I was saying earlier about this fiscal black hole that Labour identified in the summer, said that they didn't inherited it from the previous government. So and as Cera said, there was tons of rumours, an extraordinary amount of rumours in the lead up to the budget about taxes going up to fill this black hole, and Labour's manifesto pledge not to increase taxes on working people meant there were sort of limited options, limited levers to pull, and so inheritance tax I think was seen as a soft target, as was pensions. So I think that's one aspect, but I think the other is, it again sort of goes back to the decision not to bring back the lifetime allowance. I think that Labour was concerned that people might just could chuck money into pensions without any kind of ceiling and just leave it as a legacy. So I think there were those two things in mind, and that's why they've acted sort of pretty quickly with it. I mean, you do wonder when they decided not to bring back the lifetime allowance whether they actually had this in mind at the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, they seem to be the two main reasons for me.
Yeah, and Cera, I suppose in the mind of many pension savers, they're probably wondering whether these plans have been rubber stamped, as in are they definitely going to happen? Can you offer any comment on that?
So until proposed legislation is very different to actual legislation. So the consultation took place and concluded, well, it concluded in January, but it's created lots and lots of additional questions, which is probably why they originally stated that 2027 date, to give us time to get our heads around that and how that sort of impacts the probate system and how pension administrators can actually deal with that if it is to come to fruition. So I think although it's not known, there is a set intention there, and in terms of why the government particularly did it at that point in time, I think perhaps any sort of tax changes where there's an increase in tax is a bit of bad news for savers and for society in general. And I think getting that bad news out of the way in an early sort of term actually could be quite useful in terms of you know, setting out what you plan to do and then following through on it. It can also try and build integrity.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I would imagine it's a leadership technique.
Yeah, and the government actually they released a consultation. Well, and it closed last month, I suppose, just to get the industry, the wider pensions industry reaction to the plans. Craig, how has the industry responded?
Well, the reforms that have been put forward by the government have been fiercely opposed. There have been a lot of concerns around there's some potential double taxation if the pension plan holder dies after age 75. Because in that instance, there could be whoever receives the pension pot may have paid inheritance tax on whatever they get. Plus, then when they withdraw the money, they'll pay income tax at their marginal rate of tax, so the rate of tax that you pay on the next pound that you earn. So there's been a lot of talk about that, but also potential delays in administering estates, which could lead to increased costs. You know, in some cases, it could be that there are delays even when there's potentially no inheritance tax due. And so, you know, these are sort of several problems that have been raised by, you know, pension providers, investment platforms such as us.
Yep.
We've been sort of part of the lobbying push. So
calling for just a single tax, just to avoid double taxation, because just essentially it's a double whammy for beneficiaries, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we had some questions about that before, and that's been one of the sort of the big things that come out when we spoke about the surprise of it, is that, you know, the combined inheritance tax and income tax that someone could pay, and these are only could. I mean, it depends on the rate of tax that the beneficiary pays when they're taking the money out. Could be, you know, mid-60s, even higher, could be above 70%.
70%.
So, yeah, sort of effective tax rate. And so, you know, these are eye-watering levels. And so, yeah, there's been a lobby against that, and to make something that's sort of more workable, that we think is fairer. So it will be interesting to see. I mean, there was a report this morning to show that the government had 500 responses to the consultation.
Almost unheard of, isn't it?
So that's a lot. So it shows that the industry is engaged with this and are concerned about what the proposals in the current form could mean for people, could mean for families, estates, and obviously beneficiaries. Yeah,
you know, I've just had a look at our Slido questions, and we had one from Mississippi on the double taxation points, 40% on SIP, IHT, followed by another possible 20% plus for beneficiaries, double taxation. So it's just a point you mentioned. I mean, Cera, what are some of the things that the government could consider that gets away from this double taxation issue?
Yeah, it's a real challenge because they obviously need to generate capital, and I guess that there will be different planning strategies that individuals can put in place to avoid that from happening. So I think, you know, in terms of perhaps when somebody would access their pension, that the order in which you draw down from your assets may change if this is to come into play effectively, to try and avoid that double taxation piece. Because, you know, pensions are a fantastic vehicle. They will remain a fantastic vehicle regardless of this, in order to build your wealth. And I think it's a real challenge to sort of to see how it's going to actually impact people in general, because it's going to be so specific on individual circumstances. Yeah.
Actually, I want to bring in some polling. So ahead of the event, we issued a poll on our website. I think over 1,000 people responded to the poll, and we essentially asked them if they are planning on making any tweaks to their retirement or estate plan in the lead up to the change, for April 2027. And around 54% of respondents said they are actually planning on tweaking their retirement or estate plans, which I thought was quite significant. And actually 21% of respondents said they plan to withdraw more money from their pension than originally intended and spend it. 19% plan to withdraw more and gift it. And 8% said they intend to reduce their pension contributions. And, we've actually asked a similar question on Slido. I'm just having a look at the poll results now. And, actually interesting, on Slido, the majority said that they aren't planning on making any changes. So it's, the Slido poll obviously is less people were involved compared to our website poll. But I suppose the worry is people don't really know what to do in this period. It's a long period, isn't it? It's 2 years. People will be looking to retire within that time. Unfortunately, some people might pass away. So what can people do? How should people broach this period before implementation?
I think from my perspective, it's an opportunity to take stock and look at where you are and what your actual plan is and what your intentions are. I think a tax change shouldn't change what somebody's own goals and objectives are, in terms of if they're wanting to retire, they absolutely should, as long as they can sort of evidence or they're comfortable that they've got a sustainable level of income. I think if these changes do come into play, gifting is a fantastic way to sort of tackle that challenge, as is spending more money. But I think it's a double-edged sword, because if you spend more money, that's going back into the economy, and you're paying potentially a higher level of tax on it by increasing your withdrawals coming out. So yeah, it's there's two approaches that can be taken, but I think it's a really good opportunity to look at where am I now, where will I potentially be if these changes come into play in 2027, and then it's a case of, do I want to do something about it? There doesn't need to be knee-jerk reactions. There's several different strategies that can be used, and it'll be down to somebody's individual in terms of which of those strategies is most appropriate.
Yeah, Craig, do you concur?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the tricky thing at the moment is, because there's a couple of years before the reforms are due to come in, is that if someone passes away on the 5th of April 2027 as opposed to the 7th, they're a completely different set of tax liabilities would be facing their beneficiaries, because beforehand pensions not included in the estate, and then afterwards they would be. So I think that makes the planning bit tricky, and to sort of add into that the fact that the consultation's closed. We're still waiting for more information from the government, and it seems like even when they've properly considered the sort of alternative options put through by the industry, then there might then even be a second consultation to sort of review those. So there's still a bit of time and a bit of uncertainty, but I think, I agree with Cera. I think there's no harm in starting the planning process now to sort of get your head around what might change and how it might affect you.
Yeah. And another poll that we put out was on confidence in the pension system, and around 44% of respondents, bear in mind this is 1,000 people, over 1,000 people taking part in the poll, said they don't have confidence in the existing pension system. Isn't this the concern? Yeah. People not really sure how to plan their retirement, how to plan their estates if the goalpost keeps moving, keeps shifting.
Yeah. I think that's really fair. I mean, whilst it's a fantastic tool, it is an area that the government have targeted time and time again, and I think it's also something that's not particularly well understood in general. I think one of the issues as well is, lots of people have paid into pension contracts expecting to be able to take those benefits from 55. The goalposts have changed on state pensions as well, in terms of that, you can only access your personal pension, your own money, 10 years prior to the state pension age. you know, that's quite a tricky thing. Although it's not significant timeframes, perhaps you've really planned to do something at 55, and perhaps there's a really important reason why it needs to be 55.
Yeah.
And if that becomes 57 or 58, that can be a challenge, and I can understand why you may lose faith in the pension system. But that's the real risk, that people perhaps don't engage with their retirement planning, and that's the bigger risk for society, that people won't have sustainable incomes in retirement rather than too much.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the speed that the rumour mill around pensions sort of spanned before the autumn budget, I don't think that could have helped either. I mean, there was a rumour for sort of every nook and cranny of the pension system that it might change from, you know, tax-free cash to, you know, changing the upfront rates of tax relief, moving to a single rate, the IHT on pensions. There's probably some others that I've forgotten. I mean, there were so many, and you know, the sort of constant chopping and changing, like you said, moving goalposts does affect people's confidence. You know, you have to look back in the past year to a game with a lifetime allowance. We had a lifetime allowance, then it was abolished. And then Labour said they wanted to bring it back, and then said no, they've abandoned plans to bring it back. And now we've got IHT set to become chargeable on pensions in a couple of years' time. So this constant chopping and changing is perfectly understandable why people lack confidence in it. And I think this is a big task for any government to try and, you know, shore things up, bring some consistency, and foster more confidence.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you a series of questions that I just think that might be on Savers' mind, and hoping to try to get a binary answer if possible. So for people who are wondering whether it's still worth paying into a pension in order to, as part of efforts to pass on their assets in the most tax efficient way as possible, should people still do that? Should people still actively save into a pension?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you struggle to get a binary answer to that one.
Yeah.
I think it means that some people are gonna have to think about it a bit differently. If you have been using pensions up until now to harness the IHT exemption, then that might require a rethink of strategy. But you know, for the majority of people are you know, at risk of reaching retirement with insufficient savings. And as we were speaking earlier, you know, pensions are a fantastic way to build your wealth because of the tax relief if you're employed, the employer contributions that you get, and the tax-free growth as well. There's so many reasons why people should pay into a pension. So, you know, if you're still concerned that you're likely to reach retirement with insufficient funds, then there are so many good reasons to pay into one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other side of it is, I think, you know, pensions only really became a legacy planning tool in 2015 when flexible access drawdown became available. So prior to that, a pension was seen as a vehicle to provide an income in retirement. And I think as an industry, as a profession, we used the change of legal structure in terms of the flexible access drawdown contracts as a way to promote legacy planning, and it was a fantastic tool.
Yeah.
And it's just that element has changed. So I think, you know, it's remiss of us not to acknowledge that, because it's only been a sort of 9 to 10 year window that people have really been able to use that for legacy planning.
The Chancellor did say it was an unintended consequence of the pension freedoms when she made the budget announcement, which is quite interesting. I suppose one thing I hear quite a lot, you know, friends in the circle and friends' parents, they talk to me about gifting, for example. So they asked me the question: should I stop paying into my pension? I have, I'm gonna have enough money in my pension funds. I have a decent amount of assets. Worried about how much tax my beneficiaries will be hit by, you know, when I pass away. So should I stop contributing to my pension and just start gifting money to my kids, grandkids?
Yeah, I think that's something that will become more appealing to people. But again, I think the tricky thing there is something that sort of Cera touched on earlier, is working out sort of, if you are going to give money away, to make sure that you're not leaving yourself short to jeopardise your own retirement.
Yeah.
And so this is where the sort of planning aspect comes in. Because there will be ways that you can, if it makes sense to hook money out of your pension and gift it, whether you're gifting it directly to loved ones or whether you're then paying into pensions for them, for example. There are various ways that you can do it. Some might be right for you and your sort of family and your sort of intergenerational planning goals. Others may not. But I think, again, this is the time that if you're unsure about how to do it, how to go about it, it's probably the time to speak to someone, speak to an expert.
Because,
so they can help.
A lot of people have been saying that, they do want to pass on some assets, some wealth to their loved ones, to their kids, to their grandkids. And they thought, with pension policy moving, again, we're talking about shifting goalposts, with that all happened, why don't I just give a living inheritance so I can actually see where my money is going? Do you understand that viewpoint, Cera? And also, if people are taking money out, these are people who are already retired, taking money out of their pensions to gift it to their kids or their grandkids. Yeah. There's also the income, the tax bands to remember, to be aware of, because doing so might mean that you'll pay more income tax, might push you up the income tax.
Yeah, so I think including beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries in those types of conversations would be really important.
Yeah.
I think having a financial planner go through a cash flow modelling exercise with you to stress test, can you have a sustainable retirement? What happens if the worst happens? If there's a big market crash, would that impact whether you can afford to live and whatever else? The other thing that's sometimes overlooked is like the cost of care and how expensive later living can be. What you can do is cash flow model the effective cost of that, so that somebody is 100% confident that actually, if there's a market crash at this point when I'm vulnerable and there's later life issues for me and potentially a husband, can we still gift effectively? And I think having that enables somebody to sort of make a more informed choice. So I think gifting is a fantastic sort of exercise to go through if you're really confident that you're not going to need it at a later point in time. And in addition to that, as long as you're comfortable that you're relinquishing control of that wealth on making that gift, unless you were to use a trust.
Yeah.
I think it's quite, we're sort of going back to the survey and sort of showing that more people are looking to make gifts. I actually think that's quite encouraging. It shows people are engaged with these rules and looking to use, looking to approach the new taxation environment that we're going to have with a sort of savvy hat on. So I think that's quite encouraging. But it's certainly going to change how people interact with their pensions. That's for sure.
Yeah. I actually want to bring up a question on Slido from Oliver, who writes, is it sensible to exhaust my pension before spending non-pension assets in retirement? Cera, can I come to you first?
You can. I think typically the pension asset right now would be one of the last places that you draw from because of the inheritance tax position that it's in. If it all comes to pass in 2027 that's part of the estate for inheritance tax purposes, then I can see the logic of using a pension earlier. My personal view is it's rare that taking drastic action and targeting one specific product is ever in anybody's best interests. If you have an ISA, a SIP, a general investment account, potentially an investment bond, there are 4 different avenues that you can then draw income from in quite a tax efficient manner. So it's a bit of a on the fence answer, but I wouldn't say that exhausting the pension should be the route that you go down. But a pension perhaps would be more sensible to use more of it earlier on.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, totally agree.
And actually I want to zone in on the income strategy points. How will these changes impact retirement income strategies? Do you think people will perhaps look at annuities, look at some sort of insurance product? What will people do? You think people will perhaps use the ISAs more, use that more as part of their retirement planning?
I personally think that annuities will potentially become more attractive to individuals. Not particularly saying, right, well, I'm going to use all of my SIP to annuitise and get this fixed income, but perhaps looking at covering basic costs. So partially annuitising to give a standard of living, and then state pension will obviously provide for some of that as well. So I can see how that would be more attractive. And another way of sort of looking at it, if you didn't want to use the pension asset, is to almost insure against it through like a joint whole of life policy. So you can effectively calculate roughly what you expect the inheritance tax liability to be and run a policy that's then held in trust that will actually cover that liability for you on behalf of your beneficiaries. It's a very low risk way. The cost of doing it will vary depending on the individual circumstances, but that's another area to try and tackle the challenge.
Yeah. Actually, just one of the questions, I was on my laptop now just looking at the Slido questions, is trust a decent way of bypassing these rules that to obviously come into effect April 2027?
Yeah, well, I think, trusts have always, if used in the right way, can be a great way to avoid inheritance tax. And again, touching on Ciara's point, that where you're not sort of gifting it outright, you can still have, you wouldn't own the asset or the money, but you can still have some control over sort of what happens to it. So, and trusts have long been great for that, but I think people will be revisiting their estate planning strategies as a result, and they may be looking at alternative things, and so I think interest in trust is only likely to increase.
How does it work with trust? Like, as in the logistics of setting up a trust?
What was the question? Sorry.
How would the logistics of setting up a trust
work? Yeah, so if you've got capital, a capital sum that you don't expect to need, what you can then do is put that into a trust, and it can go into anything really. You can put an investment bond into that. It can just be held in cash. The trust itself just is an individual saying, actually, I'm going to move the wealth from me to this separate legal entity, for want of a better word. And that's something that does have to be registered through HMRC, and anybody that's actually registered a trust through HMRC, it's quite a long administrative process. So that's something that you need to do, and then depending on what the asset is, there will be a requirement to do some, potentially be a requirement to do some self-assessment reporting on that. So it's not a really quick, easy answer, but it can be a very good solution for, particularly if you have wealthy families that would like multiple beneficiaries to benefit from the wealth at some stage, and they're not sure on what order. Having a trust to be able to continue with that flexibility is really useful.
Sure.
I think there's another thing to bear in mind. There are sort of different types of trusts, and some are suitable for certain things, but not others. So it's really important to sort of think carefully, and again, get some advice if you need to, some legal, some tax, some financial advice, to make sure that you're choosing the correct trust, because it's all about making sure that your money ends up in the hands of the people you want it to go to.
Yeah.
And in a tax efficient way as well. So. It's important that you choose the right ones. I mean, because some, certain beneficiaries can get their hands on the money at certain ages. Others may have sort of charges periodically. So that bit takes a bit of thought and a bit of care.
Yeah.
I think. So it's quite relevant as well to mention that it's probably a really good time, if you're thinking about inheritance tax, to go and speak to a solicitor and revisit your will and make sure that's still actually in line with what your wishes are. Because these things, when you're doing planning, often work, as you say, Craig, best if you've got a financial planner, accountants and a solicitor working as a team around you to ensure that everything's all aligned effectively.
Yeah. And Ciara, as a chartered financial planner, I'm sure you've received some questions from your own clients. Can you let me know, what kind of questions are you hearing? Have you heard from your clients?
There's been a wide range of different questions. I mean, often asked is, my plan is to do this, what do I need to do differently now? And I think that's probably the bit which is frustrating for some individuals, because it's not always clear, and sometimes not going down, not having action right now doesn't mean that you're not doing anything. It's just making sure that we're well informed so that the appropriate action is taking place. And for me, lots of clients are wanting to know the detail of those rules. And frustratingly, we don't have that detail just yet. We've got the intention, what the potential implications are, but that detail isn't there. So the main one I would say is, how do I avoid paying the IHT liability? And there's lots of different strategies that you can use to do that. But as you say, the other questions that are often asked is, should I be taking more out of the pension? Should I be gifting? And I think if affordability is there, using annual gifting allowances is quite a nice thing to start doing, because they're not huge things that you know, it's not like you've done this big action that you can't then unpick. It's small actions over long periods of time.
You know, the more I think about it, you know, so with inheritance tax, the nil rate bands have been frozen since they've been introduced, right? And with pensions now going to be included as part of part of IHT calculations, that means that more and more people are actually going to be caught in the IHT net. I think we did a freedom of information request last month. We published it last month, and it found something like 153,000 estates are either going to pay inheritance tax for the first time or pay have a higher inheritance tax liability by the end of this decade, and it's only going to increase because of these frozen thresholds, right? Because the thresholds haven't, the nil rate band hasn't been uprated since they were introduced. So more and more people, I think what the nil rate band is 325,000, right? So just think about what the average house is. According to ONS, it's around 300,000. So all you need is to own, you know, the average property, and then just have a modest amount in your pension for you to then face paying IHT, right? So isn't this the war? So more and more people will be having to think of inheritance tax, and if they have loved ones, beneficiaries that they want to pass their assets down to in the most tax efficient manner, they have to start thinking about what they can do now in order to mitigate that.
Yeah, well, that's been a bit of a feature. I mean, the fiscal drag's been a huge topic for the past few years, and frozen tax thresholds. But yeah, I mean, that's a big reason why inheritance tax receipts, government inheritance tax receipts have been going up year on year, is because the nil rate band, the sort of the standard amount that you can own tax free, has been frozen at 325,000 since 2009. To sort of provide some support for people and to sort of boost the allowance up, the tax-free allowance up, we had the residence nil rate band, which we sort of touched on, which is an amount that if you leave a home to direct descendants, so children or grandchildren, you can get an extra 175,000. That's been frozen at that amount for several years. But what it means, if you're in a couple, a married couple or civil partnership, you can potentially have £1 million. But as Cera sort of said earlier, it's potential, because if your assets start to go above a certain level, 2 million, then your residence nil rate band tapers away. And so, but yeah, some of the gifting, what I found really interesting recently, some of the gifting allowances, so you can give away £3,000 a year to anyone you like, tax-free. That's been frozen since 1981 or something. It was frozen in 40 years. So, I mean, if that had increased in line with inflation, that would now be about, you could give away about £11,000, £12,000. So, you know, that's a big feature of why inheritance tax receipts have been going up. But it's an easy win for the government, because you're just, over time, as you say, like as house prices increase and other asset prices, you know, more estates are tripping into inheritance tax without the government having to sort of push up the headline rates, and so and it seems like that band is going to be frozen for several more years. So you know, when you factor that in,
sneaky, isn't it?
Well, if you factor that in, plus then with pensions coming into the estate and all the changes to farms, to businesses, changes to AIM shares. So you know, all these things mean that inheritance tax receipts are going to go up. More people, more businesses, more farms are going to get caught out by inheritance tax as time goes by.
Cera, Craig mentions the benefits of being married or in a civil partnership when it comes to inheritance tax. Do you think more people, perhaps who are in a couple but they're not married or planning a civil partnership, will actually get married? And
well, it's very topical. I had a meeting with a client a few weeks ago who's had a long-term partner for over 30 years, and I was sort of saying, well, you could get married because that will save you £400,000 of inheritance tax potentially, and he was sort of laughing and said, well, steady on, it's only been 37 years or whatever it is. So there's I think that there is a chance that I'm not sort of saying people should get married to avoid inheritance tax. It's a big decision to make, but I think if you perhaps have been putting it off and just haven't got round to doing it, but actually you're in a long-term committed relationship, that is one good way of sort of tackling the inheritance tax liability. just going back to the point that you were making there, Craig, around the nil rate band sort of staying quite static, I think the other area that we've stayed quite static at is the personal allowance.
Yeah.
So you're almost hit twice by that, because if that's not increasing in line with inflation, it then impacts how much you can draw from the pension in a tax efficient way, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's making it harder for people. I mean, on that, the personal allowance is due, or for that sort of aspect of fiscal drag, is due to come to an end in 2029. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about that at the moment with the state pension catching up with the tax-free allowance and potentially becoming taxable. So, yeah, I mean, frozen tax thresholds has been a big theme. Will continue for a few more years, but I mean, hopefully at some point they start to go up again.
And there's every chance that it could be frozen even further beyond the 2029 date.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's and from certainly with regards to IHT, that's something to sort of keep our eyes on.
Okay, and Cera. So, someone who was relying on pensions to pass on their assets in a tax efficient way to their beneficiaries, they're looking at the state of the situation now. What would you guide them? What guidance would you give them? Should they just look at their plan and think, right, I need to completely redo it, or should they just stay the course?
Your own plan, as I say, should not be impacted massively by a tax system. There shouldn't need to be an overhaul. But I think revisiting that plan and what the intentions are around it. So if you've loaded a pension, which would have been really effective planning over the last sort of 10 years or so, if you've loaded that pension, perhaps looking at that now to say, well, what is it there that I can do in terms of perhaps providing a living legacy that could work, or perhaps gifting to allow a beneficiary to start to build their own wealth in their own right. So making sort of gifts so that pension contributions can be made and things like that, and starting that intergenerational piece of planning much, much earlier. I think it's encouraging those types of conversations rather than it effectively being something that's dealt with on death.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just to add to that, I think it will accelerate this sort of so-called great wealth transfer that's due to happen over the coming decades, with trillions set to pass from older generations to younger ones. I think there are sort of several things happening this year that I think are going to accelerate that. Obviously, all the IHT changes, the increase VAT being included on private school fees. Interest rates likely to be a bit higher for longer. So there's these various things that are going to lead some people to seek some advice, to think, does it make sense to sort of start to pass more down now rather than wait till later on?
Yeah. And do you have any other tips for those in that predicament?
My view is to sit down with somebody. It doesn't have to be a financial planner. It's somebody that you trust and is going to help to hold you accountable effectively, and think about all of the things that it is that's really important to you to live a life well lived without regrets. And I think that having a focus on that sort of aspect of things, you can't really go wrong. And almost looking at it from that perspective rather than thinking what tax is going to be paid on the estate, almost looking at, is the legacy that I'm due to leave sufficient for me and my family, and how will those beneficiaries respond to actually receiving that wealth? Are they equipped? What do their plans sort of look like? That would be my view.
Do you think we overthink taxation? Do you think we forget about the importance of our plan, so why we're doing it in the first place? Why am I saving for retirement? What kind of retirement am I looking to enjoy? Also, how much money am I looking to leave to my kids? Am I looking to leave too much money or too little? All that kind of stuff. Do you think the noise of taxation distracts us from the core strategy that we should be following?
I think yes and no. I think on one hand it should be your main aims, goals. That's the thing you're looking to do. But paying less tax is a great way. Is one of the easiest ways to get there. So when you talk about pensions, that's why pensions have become so popular as a savings vehicle, because of the tax relief that you get. Tax relief on the way in, tax-free growth, and you can take some out tax-free when you get down the line as well. So I think, it shouldn't all be about tax, but it's one of several considerations that when you're looking to make big financial decisions, yeah, it shouldn't be. Yeah, it shouldn't all be about tax, but paying less tax is a big thing to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my view is that the number one priority is what your goals and aims are. And then for me, the background noise is tax, investment performance, charges. All those things are the background noise that is financial planning, financial institutions. But I think at its absolute core, what somebody's trying to achieve should be the most important thing for me.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. The way in which a planner can add value is by making sure it is a tax efficient strategy, trying to maximise investment returns at an appropriate risk level, and trying to keep costs down.
And cash flow modelling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was thinking, how helpful that can be in this situation.
100%. It changes the dynamic of a meeting completely, because you gain perspective in terms of this is where I am now. And it's quite confronting to then look at something in terms of, and here's your death at age 100,
Yeah.
and what's going to happen in between. And I think it's such a useful tool to use with people. What that provides is a peace of mind and some assurances, which you can't really put a cost on for some people.
This, I suppose, the budget announcement has. People are talking about it. This is why we've had so many people submitting questions. Thanks again, viewers, for submitting questions on Slido. People are talking about it and also talking about it with their families. Is this something you've seen,
Yeah.
Cera, from your clients? People are talking with their families about what's going on and their shift in strategy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always offer to have discussions and conversations with wider members of the family. And I'd say it's not that often that people sort of say, oh no, you do need to speak to my daughter, particularly, or son, particularly if they're young and they're in their 20s. Whereas actually that's really shifted. So there's been quite a lot of calls, there's been a lot of activity, which we're very grateful for, with the younger generations, to try and get sufficient planning in place early and to engage them with financial planning, because that's where you have the most impact over time, because it's where compound interest is most effective.
Yeah. Would you concur, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it has certainly got people talking. It's a huge change. But again, I think it sort of goes back to the point I made earlier. I think it's a good thing that people are talking, people are aware of it, and people are looking to plan. It shows that there is a certain level of engagement with people's retirement, which is something that we want to see. You want to see people engage with their pension. We see more people engage with their pension. So I think that aspect that and people are thinking about. Well, there's a huge tax change coming. This is going to affect ultimately how much money might end up in my children's pockets for their own futures. Is there a different way of doing it? So yeah, I think that's all really encouraging stuff.
No, great. So as I said earlier, we put up another poll trying to gauge our viewers' opinions on pension, their faith in the pension system, and the larger percentage, 46%, said that they do not have confidence in the pension system. Oh, it's gone up to 47, as I just say that, 47%. How can people navigate their retirement and estate planning in I suppose, in an uncertain environment? I mean, there are no certainties when it comes to taxation because of just the nature of it all. Governments change, governments have their policies, that's things happens. How can people navigate the uncertainty?
I think the biggest risk is inertia and not doing anything and not engaging with the pension and not engaging with an ISA and saving for provision on the basis that we're not sure what the tax system's going to be. There will always be a reason not to invest. And short term, it's uncomfortable because you're parting with disposable income if you're accumulating and you're working. That's the biggest risk, because if that keeps getting deferred and deferred, before you know it, you've finished work and you don't have sufficient funds to do the things that you want to do. Yeah. So I think avoiding the inertia of investing shouldn't take place because of this background noise, and looking at what is affordable and budgeting effectively and taking accountability for that aspect of it is probably the best starting point.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, again, engagement, getting started with that's often the trickiest bit. I think this is something that trying to find ways to encourage people to make the right decisions of where to put their money is something that the government's clearly thinking about. We've heard a lot about ISAs recently and how that regime might change. Whether cash ISAs will be affected, whether it will be simplified. There's a lot of talk around lifetime ISAs. So it's something that the government is obviously concerned that perhaps things aren't working as well as they should, and that might be deterring people from engaging with it in the right way. So, but in the meantime, I think it's with most people, it's just taking the time to try and engage, think about it, start the process, because sometimes it's a bit tricky, especially if they've got no previous experience of dealing with sort of savings and investments, and then you can go online and you're hit with this sort of world of different types of ISAs, pensions. What's a SIP? What does that mean? What does it do? And if you're new to it, that can be a bit daunting. So, read up on it when you can. And I think it goes back. Seek some expert help if you're not sure. That could be. You will end up paying for it, but it could be a good investment.
We also pay for peace of mind.
Yeah, and how much does that cost? So
Okay, I want us to have some time to answer questions the last 10 minutes, but before we go into the Slido questions, what's the one takeaway you want people to take away from this session in terms of people who are in a situation where they don't know what to do leading up to the change in April 2027? What should they take away from this session?
My view is that they need to speak to somebody. They need to have a really clear idea of what their current inheritance tax position is, and you are able to calculate it yourself, and if you are, that's absolutely fine. And you need to have a really clear idea of what that calculation will be from 2027, and from that basis you can then choose to speak to somebody about whether you need a strategy or not.
Totally agree with that. Yeah, I think you firstly make sure that it's the inheritance tax is a problem for you. Initially, and then if you decide that it is, then you decide you'd like to do something about it. I mean, part of the inheritance tax system is fiendishly complicated, as we touched on things like trusts. So if you get to that point, seek some expert tax, financial, legal advice. It'll often encompass the three, to be honest, especially if you've got an estate that is not the kind of norm. Because also, we've got these other changes to inheritance tax. So if you've got somebody who owns a farm and a business and has got a big pension, then there's a lot to think about over the coming years. But take the time to think about how this is going to affect you, and then take some expert advice.
And pensions remain the best tools to save for retirement.
Yeah.
I think that's important to say. The tax relief is phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
And then when you can take 25% out of the pension, obviously up to the value, was it 268,275? If memory serves correct.
Spot on.
I think people need to be aware of that. So pensions is still a really powerful tool, vehicle to invest for retirement.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's such an efficient way as well to grow wealth and to retain it. Taking it out will be useless if you're then paying tax on the growth of it. It's still a really, really efficient tool to be used.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you both. Let's answer some questions on Slido. We've covered some of them. I want to read out one. So, from Mr. Sip, what does unused pensions in proposed changes to pensions IHT probably mean? If I'm drawing on my SIP, is it then used?
Yeah.
How can we define?
Do you want to go for this one, Cera?
I'll go for this one. Yeah, so unused pensions, in my view, are pensions that haven't been taken. So if you've started to draw down from a SIP that hasn't been used, anything that you've taken out and has been spent is used. Anything that remains within the SIP would be unused. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Unspent money that you haven't spent or taken out. So it's basically the value of your pension pots at the point of death.
Sure. Another question. So if you leave the UK, how long before you avoid UK inheritance tax?
Oh, blimey. Seek an international tax expert, I think.
It gets really complicated, doesn't it, when you move abroad?
Yeah.
And even when it comes to the state pension, it depends, you might not receive, it might not be uprated, you might not receive a certain amount depending on where you move to. Like if you move to Commonwealth countries, we might have some agreements with some of the countries. So those things you definitely have to seek a tax advisor.
Definitely. I mean, I'm only regulated to deal with sort of UK individuals, so if somebody is moving offshore, then we'd refer them to somebody that had the sort of international permissions, and that can be a very complex area. So that'd be one to seek specialist advice on.
Yeah, I think you want someone who knows about the UK tax system and specifically the tax system of the country that you're looking to move to. That stuff can be quite complicated, but again, for things like that, if you can find the right person, then they could be invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have one person who asks, is it sensible to take the tax-free lump sum of 25% now and pass this on to my beneficiaries now and reduce my estate and reduce my AHT impact?
I think it will massively depend on that individual's circumstances. First question would be, are they sure that they've got sufficient remaining assets before they take the tax-free cash from there? There's obviously no tax implications for that individual taking the tax-free cash out, but you are forgoing the opportunity to take lump sums out potentially if they don't have an ISA or cash. So it really will be specific to that individual's needs, but potentially that could be a good solution.
Sure. So another from, I'm thinking, let's do Ken first. Ken, so what is the minimum acceptable period for withdrawing money from a SIPP and given as regular gifts from surplus income? We were talking about this a couple of months ago, very well.
Gifts from surplus income. Yeah, I mean, this is a rule that it's probably not as well. It's become a lot more well known since the budget, hasn't it? Previously, not particularly well known. So it's a way of that. I mean, essentially, you can give away as much of your surplus income as you like without having to pay inheritance tax. So you're not restricted by certain gifting rules. But there are some criteria to meet. So in answer to that, the gifts need to be regular in nature and not affect your standard of living. I think, and Cera will be able to add to this, is the key to this is some pretty diligent record keeping about what you've given and when. But it needs to be something that you can keep up, basically, not just if you just hook money out and then give it to someone and don't do anything else, then that's unlikely to qualify. So you need to show that it's from income that you don't need to spend.
How can you prove that, Cera?
So the record keeping is really important. The issue is it cannot be queried that you've potentially used some of your capital to afford that. So for example, if you were taking, say you needed £2,000 a month and you were drawing down from your SIPP and you had your £2,000 a month net, and then your state pension came into play and you never spent more than £2,000 a month, potentially you could then gift that state pension each month to children or whoever the beneficiaries might have been. As long as you can prove that you've never spent any more than that, or you don't require capital from elsewhere to live on, then effectively that could fall within those rules. But very stringent record keeping would need to be kept. And I'd seek legal advice in terms of how that's created. So we would do it for clients to make sure that we had all of that recorded as well. But taking some legal guidance on it, it also makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I had a question from Jay. It's quite a complex one. So he says, or she said, I've heard of investment bonds held in trust to avoid inheritance tax. Money is loaned to a life assurance product and 5% tax-free withdrawals per annum. Any views on this strategy?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you've got,
yeah. Okay, so the investment bonds, the way in which they work is that they typically pay out on death. So one of the benefits to that is also for care purposes, it tends not to be included within an estate for means testing purposes into care. So there's that sort of nuance as well. So how the taxation works is it's typically considered if you withdraw up to 5% a year, that's classed as a return of capital. You can put them into trust, but again, you'd really need a sort of structure in which you weren't requiring income from that unless it was a discounted gift trust. And in that sort of scenario, you do have to continue taking an income from that, but the capital falls outside of the estate. So it's quite specialist. They can be incredibly effective, but it is very specific to somebody's circumstances in terms of whether it would be appropriate or not.
Yeah.
Exactly that. I think they can be a really useful inheritance tax planning tool, but for the right people.
Yeah, I think we have time just for one question and one more question. So let's do this one. So what are the pros and cons of putting my residential home into a bare trust for my children as opposed to transferring it into their names to negate inheritance tax?
Over to you, Cera.
This is actually asked very regularly. I don't think it's an effective way of trying to negate inheritance tax because there's so many complications around with it. So if you were to gift it to your children, effectively you should then be paying a rental to your children, and that's the bit that's often missed by an individual. And effectively HMRC can say, no, we can see what you've done, you've gifted something in name but not in practice, and that's going to form part of the estate for inheritance tax purposes. So my view would be not to try and circumvent the legalities of it. It's to work within that system that you have, and it wouldn't be something that I would suggest to individuals if it was their main residence property.
Yeah, gift with reservation of benefit, that's what it's called, isn't it? Yeah. So anything you gift away, you need to sort of give away in its entirety. You can't continue to enjoy something from it. So again, it goes back to, if you're dealing with complex legal instruments like trusts, get some advice.
Yeah.
Personalised.
I mean, this topic is one that's not going to go away, is it?
Absolutely not.
It's going to keep us busy.
Exactly.
But hopefully we'll know more on it soon, so that we'll hear some more from the government. I think that's what everyone will want to know more about. How things are going to look in 2 years' time. Yeah,
perfect. Cera, Craig, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this really important topic.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, viewers, for joining us. If you have any questions, just let us know. And also, we have plenty of resources on this topic. If you visit ii.co.uk, you'll find plenty of articles and guidance there. And until next time, see you later.